End assemblies are a contentious thing in fencing. Everyone reckons they've got a better end assembly than the other bloke. But today we're building end assemblies to deliberately fail, and we're going to show you what some of the common mistakes are. James, we're going to break things.
I like breaking things.
Now James, just before we get into this, you're a fencer from Tamworth in New South Wales. You're a professional fencer. You've seen end assemblies done a lot of different ways. You've got your ideas about how they work, but you also know what some of the common mistakes are.
Yep, the biggest one's depth for set, and then how the stay is actually positioned and set up.
Well, we have set up some fantastic end assemblies here that are guaranteed to fail. We've used the wrong size post. We've only put them 600 in the ground, and we've made a lot of common mistakes. Let's go through it with the folks and tell them what they are.
It's been fun doing it wrong. So our first one, everything's wrong with this. It's a treated pipe post, only 600 in the ground. There's no stay, and we're pulling it about 500 off the ground here with a winch back to the ute. This is gonna go wrong. So the next one we're gonna try, we've got a stay that's way too short. And our theory here is this one's just gonna jack straight out of the ground. So this one here is exactly the same, except the stay's a bit longer. We've got a special decorative cattle tag here to add structural significance. So holding both of these stays in, we've got a 600mm piece of channel, and it's driven in 400 approximately with a sledgehammer. Should hold a fair bit of load. We're going to find out. Last but not least, we've got a steel tie-back assembly, and this features a floating concrete plate down at this end, and the theory being that as it comes under shock loading, it should be able to absorb a little bit of a hit and actually bounce back if the force isn't too great. I like shock load. All of these end assemblies are guaranteed to fail because we've used the thinnest post we could find. It's not in far enough. But what we're trying to find out is when and how the stay itself actually fails.
Now we're going to turn stuffing around in a paddock into science with these. We're going to use a tape measure. We're going to come 50mm off the post, and we're going to bang in this telltale. When the post hits the telltale, we consider the post failed, because that much movement should have slackened off the fence. Now to pull on the posts, we're using a winch attached to each post about ½ a metre off the ground that is attached on the other end to a Hilux that's in gear with the handbrake on. Not that a handbrake on a Toyota does much. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yep.
Speed dealer's on. Hit it. Bit more. That's it, fail. Okay, all the way.
Hilux is coming to visit us.
Bloody handbrakes on Hiluxes. Righto, off you go.
She gone. We'll reuse that one, mate.
Yeah, must have. Post number one actually failed of its own merits. It snapped off just below ground level. I was hoping that it would tear out, showing that it's the rear of the post that tears out of the ground, not the front. But definitely a fail without a stay.
Oh, it's still broken. That pleased me greatly.
Excellent. Never fence without a stay on the end post. It just doesn't work. Right, next.
Righto, we got post number 2 with a short stay. We tried to replicate the same setup. We've got our marker 50mm off the post, and we're going to winch it in and see what happens this time.
I better jump on those brakes.
Looks like it. This one's going to be a bit harder to kill.
Righto.
Whoop, and she's out. This one, the whole thing's come out of the ground, didn't break off.
Fully intact, hasn't broken the post, but it's winched it up out of the ground like a bicycle tyre, hasn't it?
Yep, it just pivoted and flew straight out.
So the learning here for anyone who uses a short post, a normal fence post as a stay, is just don't.
So a short stay is slightly better than no stay, but clearly for the amount of effort that you go to, it's still going to fail. You might as well not have bothered.
Okay, so third end assembly in, and we've got our long stay held in with our steel plate about ½ a metre in the ground at the other end. And how are we expecting this to fail? Well, let's have a go and find out. We've got our telltale in place. Let's see what happens when we put it under load. I'm going to go jump on the brakes of the car because I reckon this will hold a fair bit of load. James, over to you, mate. Got our safety towel in place. Stop.
Full four-wheel skid there, and she's still holding.
So that was all the brakes on, in gear, in four-wheel drive, with the winch pulling the car forward rather than the post. But let's have a look at the base here. Now, even with the ultra-thin post that was designed to fail, the winch on the Hilux could not pull this post forward out of the ground. But there is a gap at the back of the post, and that gap at the back of the post indicates, along with the telltale, that we've lost about 10 mil on the top of this post, which means that any wire tied onto this post has just lost tension. Now, this is not going to bounce back once we take the load off. The problem with these sort of fixed end assemblies is that once they move, they stay moved. Well, what a difference an extra metre on the stay length makes, James.
Certainly does.
I mean, we had, what was that, about a 1.65 stay?
1.56, this is 2.4, and our steel is 3.25 metres.
So at just over 1.5 metres, jack the post straight up out of the ground.
Yep.
At this length here, it's held sort of.
It's moved about 25 mil at the top, I think. We drove it in, we tamped it in level.
Yes.
And it's definitely moved, and I reckon that gap at the bottom has been opening up even more since we've just been looking at it.
So once this sort of end assembly moves, it stays moved, doesn't it? Because it relies on the ground locking it in place, and as soon as that moves, it stays there.
And there's no bounce back of anything. It's just going to keep going that way.
So what would have happened if we had have tied a wire off here and strained it is that that wire would have lost its tension, because we've got, what, a bit less than an inch of movement at the top of the post.
Yeah, and a small amount of length in the wire is actually a very large amount of sag.
Now, last but not least, James, the tie-back end assembly. Now, this is what you guys use up north in Tamworth pretty much all the time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fast, it's strong, and it's flexible. It absorbs shock load rather than moving with it. Let's hope that we see that in this trial.
Well, we did manage to jack that other one out of the ground, and it's got a lot less going for it, so I think this one's going to be a bit trickier. We've even chocked the ute, and we might have to chock the back wheels too yet.
We've got a tree between the ute and the end assembly, so we should be okay. All right, I'm going to jump in the ute, you jump on the winch, and there's something that I'm hoping to see with this sort of end assembly, and we'll wait and see if it happens.
Righto.
Rightio, mate, winch away. Well, there you go, mate. This one's still under full load, and you were fair stomping on those brakes. You even had the engine running so that you had the full power of the brake booster.
Yeah, I was mashing it.
And the car still moved a little bit, and you can see that we've actually curved the post. It's on its way towards snapping, and it looks like the post has moved a bit in the ground. There's a bit of a gap behind here. You reckon there's a bit of forward movement that's happened overall?
Yeah, I think the actual whole post itself is moving horizontally in the ground.
I reckon there's something else happening here too.
Yeah, righto.
And I reckon that the post has moved forward a bit under shock load. But what I'm keen to do now is I'm going to take the load off the winch, and you let me know if that gap tightens up.
You're right, I'll keep an eye on it. Yeah, it tightened all the way back. It's bounced all the way back.
So when I let that off, post straightened up again.
Very interesting.
So what that means is that this tie-back system, because we've got the spring steel in it, is acting like a shock absorber to our fence system, so it can absorb load and return back, and our fence is still tight. So people that say that end assemblies should not move, well, I beg to differ.
Seems to be very much proved wrong here.
I reckon the secret of these tie-back systems that's not often spoken about, mate, is that when you have a perfectly flat plate, it allows that plate to slide on the ground. Now, there are detractors that say that these plates will sink into the ground when it rains, but I've seen for myself fences that have been completely flooded, and these plates are still sitting on top of the ground like the day they were put in.
And the thing is, even if it does sink and you do get any movement, it's as simple as tightening up whatever tension system it is, whether it's a threaded rod or a cable. They're all designed to have a way of tightening it and moving it back.
Now, I reckon what we do is we go one step further and we tighten this up and loosen it a couple of times, and we actually record what happens to this plate on the ground so that people can understand how a strong end assembly is actually an end assembly that can move to absorb shock and then return.
Yep, from my personal experience it works quite well, so let's test it and record it.
Tension on. Tension off. Tension on. Tension off. Tension on. Tension off. So James, there's a good reason why fencers like yourself are moving over to, or have used in your case, steel tiebacks on a very regular basis, isn't there?
Yes, it's the ease that you can put it together and the fact that it's adjustable if something goes wrong, which we've done our best here to make it go wrong, and it's still holding up, and even if it had moved significantly, it's a simple matter of tightening the rod back up.
And just the fact that when we took the tension back up off the end assembly, and there was a fair amount of tension, there was enough tension to bend the pine post, it bounced straight back into the position that we set it in.
Yeah, it's pretty much moved exactly to where it was, and even though, you know, the point has sunk into the post, everything else has more or less stayed how you want it to be.
So I suppose the moral of the story is be more like a reed than a tree. When you have a look at a flooded river, it's the trees that get washed downstream. The reed bends over with the pressure and then stands back up again, and that's how we should have our fences for long life.
Yep, nature always knows best.
Guys, if you like this kind of content, don't forget, hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. Plenty more on timthompson.ag. It makes a huge difference to the channel. James, been an absolute pleasure breaking stuff with you.
Good fun.
We love breaking stuff on this channel.
Absolutely love it.
Guys, we'll see you next week with something else.